Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to dive into all of the latest from Star Wars, including some of the news from this week, as well as taking your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss. This is an open Q&A format, so if you guys have questions, anything you'd like to ask us, this is your chance to do so. A little bit lighter news week after a couple weeks that picked up a little bit in regards to Star Wars news. But we are excited to talk about the things that we do have to talk about, including the first story, which has been kind of the biggest one so far this week. Just Simon Kinberg kind of reaffirming that he is still working on his Star Wars trilogy. We haven't really heard anything about it in what, probably 8, 9 months. It was at the end of last year that we got that announcement or kind of that breaking news that was never officially confirmed by Lucasfilm. So hearing that he's still working on it and that Andor has been a big source of inspiration for him, we'll talk about what that means and how Andor's influence could pave the way for future Star Wars content. We also have some comments from Ron Howard, which have been making the rounds about kind of the behind the scenes of the initial split between Lord and Miller and Disney and the way everything was unfolding there and how he really got involved with that project solo Star Wars story. So we're going to talk about some of those other things as well as a few other minor stories that we can get to if the conversations are starting to slow down. But of course, this is focused on your guys' questions. So whatever you guys would like to ask, send it into the chat. If you want to make sure you get a question on tonight's stream, make sure you send in a super chat. It really helps our channel out, and you get bumped up to the top. We'll instantly answer your question once we finish what we're currently talking about. We also will get to you, if there's multiple super chats throughout the stream, we will guarantee to get to you before the stream is over. Other ways you can bypass super chat. If you join our Patreon YouTube membership programs of a certain tier, you will be able to send in your questions for priority chat access. You can send it in via the YouTube chat. If you're a YouTube member, if you're a Patreon member, you can send us the link to your YouTube handle, or you can just comment on the post on Patreon, and then we will answer your question from there. All right, before we get started tonight, of course, make sure you hit the like button. Right now, we have more people watching than have hit the like button, so please do so. It really helps out our channel. And if you're new, subscribe. We do this every single week. Every Tuesday, we go live taking your guys' questions, your comments, anything you would like to discuss. And if you haven't been around the channel in the last week or so, we've released a few videos. We have our Bad Batch Sanctuary video that came out reviewing that novel, as well as the latest video, which was the High Republic timeline, the complete timeline, and everything in chronological order from the High Republic books, comics, video games, TV shows, short stories. Everything that's involved with the High Republic is on that timeline. So if you're somebody who's new to the High Republic, wanting to get into it, there are no spoilers there. It's just the timeline breakdown. Check that video out. If you're somebody who has been reading the High Republic and you want to see if you missed anything, check that video out as well. So before we get the official news kick started, we have to acknowledge a sad thing that happened in the world of film yesterday or 2 days ago, I believe, and that was the death of Terrence Stamp. Many of you will know him as Chancellor Valorum from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, but he was an iconic actor, especially in genre, and really a lot of his iconic performances in science fiction and fantasy and horror kind of stemmed from his first appearance, the thing that most people know him for as General Zod in Superman 2. That was kind of his foray into science fiction and fantasy, and he's become such an iconic part of the film industry since then. His voice alone is super iconic, but he did play Chancellor Valorum in Star Wars Episode 1, so I wanted to acknowledge that we lost him in these past few days. He was a wonderful actor, seen a lot of his stuff, and he's always wonderful in it. He's very much so memorable in everything he's in. But yeah, it's truly sad to lose him, but he did live a long life, 87 years old. He will be missed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it took me so long as a kid to really like picture Zod being Valorum. I mean, Zod is anything but ineffective, right? He definitely takes down Superman a notch. And whether you watch the Richard Donner cut or whatever, like any version of Superman 2, you're like, oh yeah, okay, like this is the guy, right? And I mean, he's a iconic character in comics, but I don't think anybody really knew him as a household name until we get that movie and really get the gravitas and weight of his performance there, despite wearing, maybe not the most incredible costume, for Superman 2, but that's just how good he was, right? And, yeah, I mean, it took me so many years because 'cause I'd seen Episode 1 and Superman 1 and 2 around the same time, but for him to, like, years later for me to realize that he's Valorum was like, "Oh, wow, okay." This is, like, a very shocking thing that I just never clicked to me, and that just spoke to his level of performance. You know, even though he had a great voice in both, like, he was able to really like inflectuate more of what he was trying to say and do with his characters and separate them. I mean, a lot of great actors do, but a lot of great actors with great voices become known for that voice. And he managed to always kind of ride that level between, it's commanding, but it's different each time. And yeah, I mean, some of it is also riding around Valorum and the fact you don't really get a lot of him too, for sure. But still, it's still sad anytime to hear about some a member of the Star Wars family, being gone and at least, he had a very long-lived life, so, yeah, rest in peace to Terrence Stamp, hope that we get more Valorum material someday in the future, I definitely enjoyed what we got in Clone Wars. I know there's that one book that came out too, around what was it, like, 2001, 2002, that's like a prequel
Yeah,
essentially. So,
Cloak of Deception.
yeah, exactly. So I wanna see him elevated as a character, especially with how so much of Legends is like the Valorum family is so big and important. I'd love to see a little bit more of it, that character one day, but if this is kind of where we cap off the character, that's fine too. It works for the intents of the story, and, letting Terrence have a little bit more of a say about that character is more than fine by me.
Yeah, and Brandon Tran was asking us a little bit later in the chat, what do you guys remember the most about Terrence Stamp, who passed away and played General Zod? General Zod is definitely the thing I remember most, although The Phantom Menace is the movie of his I've seen the most by far. But General Zod is so good, and he does such a great job of commanding that performance. The film in general, especially if you watch the theatrical cut, definitely rides that line between full camp and also actually being an intimidating sci-fi villain. He's just as good, if not better, in the Donner cut, which is to me a superior version of that film. But that's the thing I remember him most for. I remember him in a bunch of other small things. Like I think one thing from my childhood that I remember him from, it's not the best movie, but it's the Haunted Mansion movie with Eddie Murphy. He's in that. He's also in Elektra, which I remember, and not a good movie, but he did a lot of fun like roles. He took on a lot of things in genre, and that's kind of one of the things I love about a lot of, especially like British highbrow actors, is when they're not afraid to jump into some of these campy, cheesy roles, things that a lot of people would not take a risk on. Somebody like Terrence Stamp, Malcolm McDowell is another one. Some of these people like to take chances on genre, and so I really appreciated that. One I forgot he was in, but definitely left a mark, was something recently. He was in Last Night in Soho, which was Edgar Wright's last movie before this year when his next movie comes out. So a lot of great stuff, but definitely General Zod is the thing I remember him most for. That's the thing that, like, to me, that's his just stamp on the world, really. That's the one that, like, when you see a picture of Terrence Stamp, my mind instantly goes to Zod. But yeah, what about you, Brandon? What's your favorite Terrence Stamp performance? And Seneca, what about you? Is Zod your favorite as well?
Yeah, just because he gets to actually play a big role there.
Yeah.
I will say he leans a little bit more camp than I like over time, and I haven't seen the Donner cut in its full, so I can't really give like a full argument for whether or not it is so much better of a performance from him. Um, I also have kind of not really try to watch the Donner cut after hearing that the ending is quite literally the same as the first Superman, which is like, okay. I don't know how much that film works for me if the ending is going to be that conclusion, but one day I'll be curious enough and have time to watch it. But yeah, I mean, I still liked him. Don't get me wrong. I found a lot of the costuming pretty cartoonish. Like it does really feel like the Flash Gordon isms of sci-fi had really come to life
Mhm.
with those characters, and I don't know, there's still something so timeless about seeing, like, the Superman costume and then seeing that, and I'm like, Okay, like this is where it really does start to feel like we're still in this late 70s, early 80s of filmmaking and genre, especially like you mentioned, right? Despite taking that chance, genre doesn't necessarily catch up to the imagination of actors and writers and all that. There's certain limitations at that point versus now where it's whole behemoth of an industry when it comes to the costuming and everything and just the design philosophies and all. But you don't get to where we are without having that stuff. And sometimes a costume can be ignored for the most part when you get to see the commanding presence of a character. So I still remember that. Um, that being said, I know Brandon, you wrote Phantom Valorum and Phantom Zone. I'm pretty sure you mean Chancellor Valorum and the Phantom Menace, but it kind of does work in the same way for the character because he is kind of thrown to the sharks. He's kind of like kept away. He's sequestered away once Palpatine kind of really makes his move for power through Padme, right? So yeah, I mean, I always still remember that scene of him, like, sitting down exhausted, like, like, he
Mhm.
can't believe what's happening. He can't process it to a degree, and, like, there's a whole weight of the galaxy, like, really resting on his shoulders after everything that's been going on throughout the course of before and during the Phantom Menace, so I think even despite having such little sway, you could tell that like he definitely commanded and understood his character. Like even when the Jedi land for the first time and he's greeted, right? It's stiffness to them. It's like, they're just doing formalities versus Palpatine. There's a little bit more there. There's a little bit more openness to them. Like you can see that he brought that to his character that he's kind of like trapped in his own maze. He's kind of put inside his own phantom zone essentially before he's officially thrown to, I guess, a Star Wars version's equivalent of, getting knocked off the top perch. So, yeah, I mean, definitely. And yeah, no, Brandon, don't apologize. I found it funny because it does really fit the character that Valorum, you only get like 5, 6 lines from him and then he's gone. But
Yeah.
enough of that was there to like still command an understanding of like just how lost he is, how much power he has lost, how much he's mired and everything that Palpatine is obviously, manipulating behind the scenes, but also is, very willing to like secede to Valorum to just say, hey, just look at the dude. Like he's just not doing great physically, mentally, how he talks to everybody and all that. So I mean, I'll always remember that, like Liam said, because I watched it way more. But I still think, I mean, you can't go wrong with both performances. If you're just looking for a full performance, though, you have to go with General Zod.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it would be so great to get more of Valorum and just see his rise to power and stuff too, especially as legends went on and canon as well. There's been the establishment of like the Valorum dynasty and all of that. Like it would have been cool to get a little bit more of how what his place was in that hierarchy. Like where was the Valorum family at that time? But yeah, definitely one of his best roles was Zod. And yeah, the Donner cut is a weird one because the ending is the same, but it originally before Donner got fired was supposed to be the ending of Superman 2, and then after he got fired, they changed it to the ending of Superman 1. So that was it's a kind of an interesting piece of history. It's something you have to definitely watch, and it doesn't feel like a completed film a lot of times. It's kind of choppy because they are filling in a lot of gaps. They fill in the gaps with like screen test footage as well. So it's something that's really an oddity in film history because it's not truly a director's cut. It's like a complete reassembly, made out of stuff that it's made in 2006, so 26 years later, and Christopher Reeve had already passed away and, of course, had his accident, so it's a really strange oddity, but I think it's one of those things that if you watch it with the lens of, like, this is what could have been if they, had actually the ability to make it, it's really I think a more powerful version of the story. But yeah, that's Terrence Stamp. Rest in peace. He will be missed, and he will always be a significant part of the Star Wars family. Let's move on to our first main topic today, which is going to be an interview recently with Simon Kinberg. For those of you who aren't familiar, Simon Kinberg is a writer, director, producer, mostly known for his producing roles, but he did co-write a bunch of films in the X-Men universe. He also wrote and produced stuff in Star Wars Rebels and was one of the co-creators of that show with Dave Filoni. So he has been involved in Star Wars for a while, and it was, I believe, at the end of last year It was basically announced by the trades, but wasn't confirmed by Lucasfilm, that he was going to be writing and producing a series, a trilogy of Star Wars films. Now, nowhere in there did they say he was directing, but which, as a director, I believe his only big budget film credit as a director was X-Men Dark Phoenix, which, you can attribute to him if you'd like to. It's not a good movie at all, but he also had a lot of studio problems with that film that probably made it even worse. But yeah, he's not supposed to be directing, he's supposed to be writing and producing. And recently he spoke in an interview and talked a lot about how he has been really influenced and enjoyed Andor. So, according to Nerdtropolis, who recently spoke with Simon Kinberg, he was absolutely thrilled with how good both seasons of Andor were. He stated that along with his continued working relationships with Filoni and Kennedy, seeing that Tony Gilroy came up with and reaffirmed his commitment to the franchise. Kinberg said, "There's a ton of wildly talented folks that I want to do great work. I was super inspired and just sort of awestruck by what Tony Gilroy did with Andor. I thought that was about as good science fiction storytelling as you can possibly do in any franchise. It's not even a dream come true. I couldn't have dreamed it. They just told me there'd be more movies and would have been unbelievable. To be allowed on the set of any of them was already my dream. My enthusiasm only grows with working on and around it in regards to working on his part of the franchise." So a lot of people have taken this and like spun it as like Kinberg says Andor is the basis for his Star Wars films, and, that's obviously not what he's fully saying. He's just saying that that's something that he thought was truly spectacular that they just did, and that has inspired him to get back into the Star Wars franchise, which he has not really been involved with since Rebels early on. And so I mean, in regards to Andor, it's a hard project to not get inspired by if you're a Star Wars writer. It's something that's the pinnacle of what Star Wars has done under Disney, and it's really the best thing, in my opinion, that Star Wars has done since the Clone Wars. And if you want to go back to just live action, since to me, Revenge of the Sith, but objectively, it might be the best thing since Return of the Jedi slash Empire Strikes Back. So it is a phenomenal thing to be inspired by. Now, when it comes to his own work, I don't necessarily see in what he is supposedly working on with this rumor that there's going to be this whole cinematic universe based around the post sequel characters, a bunch of new ones introduced, Ray, Finn, Poe all coming back. This kind of big event story that they're going to create, Endgame esque, Infinity War esque around a big post sequel Star Wars story, i.e., what they originally named Rey's movie after, New Jedi Order. If his trilogy is kind of for lack of a better term, 10, 11, 12, like the heartbeat, the main piece of that series, I don't see him creating an Andor for those movies. But could he take some of that elevated look at Star Wars and apply it to some of the stuff he's doing? Sure, he can look at it a little bit more seriously. He could look at it a little less, childlike. Would that be the right direction? Not if he's doing 10, 11, and 12, in my opinion. You've got to, we're going to talk about Ron Howard a little bit later, but I think you got to adhere to the George Lucas philosophy of making these films fun, entertaining for all ages. But it's nice to know that he is at least versed in what's been going on with Star Wars recently, inspired by the work of his peers. And Andor is as good a thing as any to get inspired by for writing your future Star Wars film.
Yeah, I mean, I largely fall on the same line of thinking. It's just the fact that Andor was a knockout. Andor was something that revitalized a lot of people's interest to end this sort of streaming exclusive era of Star Wars, right? Like it started off super hot with The Mandalorian, but The Mandalorian is not objectively a super original title. It just was super well produced, super well executed in its first two seasons, stumbles a bit in the third season, and I think that's more just because you don't get Filoni and Favreau together, and a lot of that storytelling that could have been, a little bit more sound throughout that season has a weird ordering to it. And the fact that Book of Boba Fett was just very much like a very interfered project and expanded out project to just ensure that people don't forget Baby Yoda for 1 year, which, like, showed a lack of trust, especially with everybody staying home. Even until that point, they weren't gonna miss out on Baby Yoda just like that. So that was my frustration there with it for sure. And then, we've had shows like Kenobi that had a lot of ups and downs visually. We've had shows like Skeleton Crew that are just almost entirely ignored and forgotten despite having quality. We've gotten Acolyte, that's been divisive and all that. So we've had a lot of ups and downs throughout this whole streaming era. But standout throughout was Andor. Andor came in and then continued well past its release date. Once we got especially to the Aldani heist, that's when things started picking up, and then once we get to everything that's happening on, uh, sorry, on the prison escape and everything, like that's when it just started blowing up, and then by the time we reach the end of the finale, it's maybe not as explosive, but people are catching up, and for weeks and weeks after, it's got the strongest ratings of, like, follow-up viewership, no major drop-offs, like, if anything, a growing audience, actually, at the end of season 1. Season 2, despite how crazy of a release schedule it was, which, it worked for how the story was told, don't get me wrong, it still, like, coulda just disappeared, like, so many of these, like, batch episode drops for a lot of seasons can happen without proper marketing and all that, and I wouldn't even say there was a lot of marketing this time around compared to season 1. But they got it out there. They somehow managed to condense 4 seasons down into 1 season. They made a great conclusion that leads into Rogue One, lets it stand on its own, has a lot of its own originality, and again, same like season 1, continued past its 4th week, and people are catching up. People are like, "Oh my god, this is great stuff. This is stuff that needs to win Emmys and all the like." So, yeah, why wouldn't you look at something that has just been objectively a great success despite everything about its creation seemingly setting it up for failure, right? Like even season 2, like I said, wasn't supposed to be the end of it. It was supposed to be the second of another 4 more to go, right? And the fact that Gilroy himself was like, "There's no way I can do that. I need to condense it," and he came out with this strong of a product that, Disney can do whatever they want. They can make multimedia, they can flesh out things, they can make things a little bit more cohesive if they really want to, but without any of that stuff, it's still that great. I mean, why wouldn't you be inspired by that, right? That this is someone who's come about at the very end of the streaming bubble and seeing its cracks form immediately as Andor season 1 comes out, and by season 2, the bubble exploded, and everybody's consolidating studios, everybody's pushing streaming only movies and shows and making them into movies and to put in theaters again. Like it's not going to ever be something that'll be achieved in that same way. So of course it's inspirational and it's just great storytelling in general. So I'm glad that he's looking at that as like an inspiring thing. But like a lot of clickbait online would want you to presume he's not making Andor. And I know there's a lot of Andor exclusive enthusiasts who'll be like, why not? Well, again, this is a franchise that's got legacy from 1977. It's for everybody. Like George Lucas said, Star Wars is made for 12-year-old boys. I'm not saying that's necessarily what Star Wars is now. There's a space for everybody for sure. But that is still, like, the primary audience. You wanna still have kids be drawn and fall in love with these films, right? Like, there are still kids that, like, they did transition off the sequels into the streaming era, but they still have a lot of love for the sequels because those were the films they grew up on. If you're gonna suddenly be like, "Okay, kids 5, 6 years from now are gonna have to start watching Andor level storytelling," it's not gonna really be a pleasing. Like, they grow up on cartoons, they grow up on YouTube, they grow up on TikTok, they grow up on stuff that is more appealing to their age group and is quick and fast and is not necessarily trying to like have such layered meaning and everything that you have to dissect through the dialogue. No, it's like that can still be there, but more for like the world building, more for like the iconography and all that. So yeah, I think he's just saying like, it does definitely pushes me to want to reach that kind of level, that kind of standard with my own writing, with my own execution. It's definitely something that pushes him to consider taking risks and gambles with inspirations. How closely can you hem to like real world stuff? I mean, Star Wars, as it originally came out, was George Lucas saying the rebels are the Viet Cong and the Empire is the U.S. military industrial complex, right? You don't need to know that, but as a writer, as a creative, if you don't really pull from real world things and you only start kind of self cannibalizing your own property, you kind of lose a lot of worth and value, right? So if you're not being inspired by the world around you, if you're not putting that into your work, the most minute ways, you're not gonna necessarily have much staying power, or you won't have much time for people to go be like, "Oh, yeah, no, maybe it didn't make sense now," but, like, 5, 10 years later, like, "Oh, there is some value, there is some inherent level of, like, meta storytelling that's connected to the real world that's happening here and inspires us and reflects on stuff that's happened or things that are currently happening again or new things." So, I think that's another thing. I think just to not be afraid about looking around and trying new things and not just sci-fi, not just in space fantasy, but from the world around us. And it'll be exciting. We're never gonna have the original trilogy again, and trying to do that was not something George Lucas had in mind, right? The sequel trilogy kind of tried to do that. It seems weird that like some of the most forgotten elements are actually now the most like politically powerful and poignant of those films, despite not really have world building. So look at like what George Lucas did and look at what Gilroy did. You can combine that. They have a lot of the same sensibilities. It's just the audiences for both are just a little bit different. And at the end of the day, the George Lucas audience is going to be the one that sticks around forever and ever, right? That's still going to be some of the best stuff ever told. And I mean, I got a poster of Emperor Strikes Back right behind me. As much as I love what Tony Gilroy did and everything, you can still make something that heavy and dark and still make a great film like Empire Strikes Back. That I still think it has even more political messaging and more weight than even a lot of the stuff that eventually has to transition to Rogue One has, and it's like the second season of Andor. So yeah, I get why people are like, oh yeah, Andor is gonna be like the inspiration for all Star Wars moving forward. It'll be a inspiration. It will not be the inspiration, and if it was, I wouldn't personally be happy with it. I still love the Star Wars that was there from the very beginning. That should still always be an influence, but understand exactly why they did that stuff. That's why stuff like Star Wars Rebels works so well, because it's like, what was the inspirations of George Lucas, of Macquarie, and all these great artists that were coming together? Do it again, right? Like, put those same inspirations, put in the medium that you're working in, translate it, obviously, and then you'll find something that'll actually have great staying power and great storytelling potential.
Well, and I think the thing that the world has shown recently is there's kind of, even though Andor is so great, people don't want pure cynicism and pure critique of society, 24/7 in their fantasy mediums. I mean, Superman just kind of proved it this summer that people want joy in these things. And so I think the happy medium really is to find that way to homage the classic feel of Star Wars, which the sequels tried to do at times and tried to do new things at times, but find a way to homage that original style, but within a look that takes it seriously. And I think that's the thing you can learn from with Andor is it doesn't have to necessarily be as dark when you're making a series of Star Wars movies or as cynical as Andor often is, but it fits for that story. You can be a fantasy story, but as long as it feels like it's serious, that works. It feels like you're taking it seriously. It feels like the world is taken seriously. It feels like something that's planned out and strategized and everything is thought. The filmmaking process is taken seriously behind it. And I think that's something that Star Wars really should be aiming for is how do we figure out a way to envelop the next generation into the Star Wars myth. I mean, we've talked about that before on the channel, how right now the biggest problem for Star Wars is that they can make stuff, creator driven stuff like an Andor, and that connects with all of us. That connects with the people who are maybe, 15 and older. And as you get even older than that, you start to connect with it even more so than when, some, teenagers who think they really understand the complexities of a lot of that stuff. And even, our age hasn't gone through a lot of the things that Andor's depicting, right? But you can connect with adult audiences that way, and in a lot of ways, it's easier to connect with adult audiences than to make content that's great for all ages, right? And I'm not saying Andor was easy to make, but like you could, if Star Wars wanted to get that way and be like, no, our fans are all between the ages of 20 and 60. That's our big core fan base, which is probably accurate currently, that that's the core fan base of Star Wars. We can just make, harder edged Star Wars storytelling like Andor and really target that specific audience, then you're going to lose the next generation completely. Right now, Star Wars has survived for nearly 50 years on being a franchise that your grandparents like, your parents like, your children like and their children like. So it's something that connects with everybody. If you start to bring in more cynicism and even darker storytelling, it's great as a one-time deal with Andor. It's great to do it again in a different storytelling style of storytelling. But I think if you're having a main Star Wars trilogy, you definitely need to bring that seriousness, the way Andor creates its world and really takes it seriously, and mix it with the myth and the joy of what the original trilogy was. And so that's the fine line that Kinberg's having to walk. But I think Andor does such a great job of making a compelling world and really making you take it seriously, that that's something to absolutely learn from with these next series of movies, especially if you're going to be doing not just a trilogy, but a trilogy and some spin-offs. Like, I'm assuming the way they're describing it, Kinberg's series might be the Avengers of the series. And then in between, you're going to get your individual character movies. You might have your Rey movie, you'll have Starfighter, you could have a Finn movie in the future, you could have a new character who's spun out of some of these things, get their own movie. And in that vein, that does mimic the way New Jedi Order was handled, where you had your big hardcover books. Pretty much all the significant plot threads happened in those, and the paperbacks had a lot of great character moments and filled in the gaps. Sure, there were still things like Ben Skywalker being born in Edge of Victory, but those books didn't quite have the magnitude, the galaxy shaking things. There were characters died, characters changed, but the galaxy shaking things were in the big books. And so you can kind of mimic that style for the future. And I think if he's trying to create something that's that significant, like New Jedi Order was, that's a good template to follow. We're going to get into our next topic here, but before we do so, let's take about maybe 5 or 6 questions off the top here tonight and then jump into the next topic here. Anybody talking about Andor in the chat before we move on? Or, I mean, Simon Kinberg or Andor? It doesn't seem like there are too many questions about it. At the bottom, I like movies says, you think can do the sequel trilogy and try again, considering the success of Andor? No, they're never going to retcon the sequel trilogy. It doesn't matter if people want that. They're not going to do it. They have too much money into it already. Like I've always said, the number one reason they won't retcon it is the parks. They have so much money invested in the parks that if they were to retcon it now, the Rise of the Resistance ride, which to me is like the greatest ride in the world, even if it's sequel themed, uh, that is $1 billion that they spent on that is all for nothing. Um, Not just the iconography, which they are slowly peeling away the First Order and Resistance iconography of the lands in their parks. And like Rey isn't as prominent of a character walking around as she used to be. Now they have Luke and Mando and all these characters in there, but they just have so much invested in the sequels. They're going to try to fix it first. I can't say they'll never retcon it. Like they could 50 years down the line be like, we haven't, all the actors from Star Wars have passed away, kind of the original actors. We have a great new idea for a story that could take place after Return of the Jedi. Let's try to tell that story. And it's going to assume there were no Star Wars sequels. Like they could do that eventually one day, but I think they're going to spend the next 10 to 15, maybe 20 years trying to fix it, iron out the new timeline, because they know the only direction they can really go is forward. And eventually all these actors are going to pass away. They're all going to get too old. We already lost Carrie Fisher. Billy D. Williams is almost 90. Harrison Ford's in his mid to late 80s. Mark Hamill's almost 80. You're going to lose a lot of the people who are truly connected to Star Wars. Even Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen is mid to late 40s. Ewan McGregor's in his 50s. So there's just not, these people aren't going to be around forever. And so you need to push forward if you're going to continue with this franchise. They have to develop what the future is. And I don't think it's nearly as satisfying for a lot of people to say, well, we're just going to retell the same story in the same time period over and over again, but just in a different way until we finally hit it and finally get it right. I think they have better odds of getting it right just moving forward. Now, I like movies. I still would like to see characters or actors like a Harrison Ford, or which is never going to happen, but like a Harrison Ford or a Mark Hamill get their due, getting to play those characters maybe in a show or something that takes place before the sequels. Unfortunately, we won't have Carrie Fisher. You can still do stuff with them, but as for the sequels, they're never going to get rid of them. Or at least not anytime soon. They're just going to continue to tell stories around them.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think a big point there that you make is like considering the success of Andor. Andor still is not the biggest thing Disney has done for the Star Wars brand on streaming. That's still Mandalorian, right? And that is the first movie that we're gonna get, The Mandalorian and Grogu. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're taking their biggest streaming success and saying we have to move it up to movies, Andor in no way is gonna get that, and Andor is already a spin-off of Rogue One, right? It's not like it was something that started there and you're like, "Oh my god, now we wanna make a Rogue One." That was not the point of it. The point was just to kinda explain, flesh out, make things a little bit more meatier and understandable about this journey that the rebellion goes through, this transformation, before they become a little bit more of, like, the mythical storytelling of the original trilogy. What is the grounded reality of getting to those steps, right? So no, that's the short answer, and it's because it's like streaming will never be, and like we've seen in the '60s and '70s with television in America and throughout most of the world, you can't just supersede filmmaking like that, right? Like, yes, it's the lines are getting blurred for sure, day after day, but a lot of the stuff for streaming is being propped up on subscribers, not revenue. Movies have already crazy level of Hollywood accounting to them, the accounting that they have for streaming is something quite different, and it's way more hidden. You don't see Netflix report anything. A lot of streaming services are stopping their whole reporting. It just doesn't work that way, right? And we've gone away from like the TV formats that worked of having like seasons and seasons of characters, a little bit more grounded stuff, stuff that doesn't necessarily have to have the big screen, but can still be just as entertaining because you're focusing more on character arcs and journeys and a little bit more of darker, grittier stuff that you don't necessarily want your kids to see and all that, right? Like there's a lot of flexibility that television has that movies don't, especially now that we're kind of coming towards the end of the IP driven era where everything was four quadrants, where you have to go for it's a film that everybody can enjoy, right? And even if things are kind of rebounding again, maybe a little closer to like the 90s level, stuff like that, it's still gonna take some time to ever reach that because COVID and everything has destroyed the industry. We're never gonna really reach those numbers again. 2019, as great of a year as film was for them, it still wasn't actually what the highest year before COVID. I think it was 2017 or 2018, right? So, and that's what Endgame and all that happening here. So it's like you can say considering the success of Andor, but Andor is a little drop in a big pond. It's a very wonderful pond. It might change the pH levels. It might change everything about the pond, but it won't change every single detail and transform it and have long lasting effects. It'll just have its little chunk and share. And that's totally fine. That's good. Star Wars is good when it's diverse and multiplying in its storytelling mediums and efforts for sure. But yeah, having people redo the sequel trilogy, no, that's a lot of work. First of all, nobody's gonna do that. We don't have Carrie Fisher, so recasting her now, right? It's only good for the character, not after we've already seen the character in 2.5 films, basically. I mean, I would hate that for her. She would probably make some dumb jokes about it and be like, "This is state of Hollywood now." They made me she complained so much, like, "I had to lose so much weight for the movie, and now you're saying I have to redo it all over again when I'm much older?" Like, no. It just doesn't work that way. That's not it's you've seen remakes of, like, individual films and stuff. If you see remakes of, like, big film franchises, frankly, it's happening as like streaming shows. It's never going to be as big as the original film stuff because movies at the end of the day, despite how diminished they are, they're still way bigger. And like Liam said, yeah, I mean, I think there should have been way better planning and structure, right? Like just because it worked for the prequels, just because it worked for the original trilogy, doesn't mean that it works for someone that's not George Lucas as the brain trust behind the whole thing. And I don't think it would have worked for George Lucas even if he had a whole organized trilogy because some of the concepts he was throwing out, the microbiotic world of the Force, Talon and Darth Maul reborn as like your villains of the sequels, like I don't think he had it quite as well as he did in the original and let alone the prequel trilogy era. So Disney made some mistakes thinking they could just do the same things. They need to know where to be different. Now they have that choice of actually learning from their mistakes, learning from other franchises, learning from their competitors, seeing what is working, seeing what's attracting audiences today. They're making a small gamble, relatively Mandalorian and Grogu. They're making a much bigger gamble on Starfighter. If those both are good successes, then we're gonna see variety, and maybe we do see an Andor-esque movie, maybe around Plagueis or something. A nice little trilogy there, where you still combine the Force, but you still have a lot of those darker, more serious elements, more of a reflection of society and all that. All that stuff will be wonderful. to can the sequel trilogy when you've got these actors that are of age, that can age with the franchise gracefully, can get plenty of story that, 30 years from now, we look at it as like, "Hey, guys, that was just, like, the starting point. That was their origin, and now we've gone 20, 30 years of appearances in movies, shows, cartoons that have just made these characters super wonderful and super big," right? Why wouldn't you take that? Why wouldn't you avoid the issues that we had with the original trilogy cast being old and, seeing the early successes that we've had with Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen being back, and it just doesn't make sense to not give them a second chance. It's just more of like it, and I think if you ever blame an actor for a movie when frankly all the acting in the sequels is quite solid to great compared to both trilogies, it kind of just comes down to direction and writing. Fix that stuff up and then oh wow, maybe people will look at it a little bit differently. You might not win everybody back and you shouldn't even be trying to do that. You should be just trying to write the best story that these actors can perform to the best of their abilities. And you'll be surprised how many people are going to be like, you know what? Yeah, why not? Why not? Good enough for me. I want more new eras. I want new stories for sure. But if this is what you have to watch,
Where it bounced out. So, does it look like we're back on? Can you guys let us know if you can hear us or something? Something cut out. Seems like we dropped a little bit. Um, are you guys able to hear us, see us?
think we're back now. I think internet just dropped for me in my area. Let us
All
know if you
right.
guys can hear us. I think we're good. Uh, yeah, it seems good.
Okay. Well, then, cool. I think it cut out like right as you were ending your thought. So we can move on, I guess, to the next question. But thank you, I like movies, for that one. And thanks for the discussion on Andor. Um, as we move into your guys' chats, again, questions, comments, anything you'd like to say to us, send it into the chat. We're going to take here the first few, and then we're going to move into our second topic here and kind of work in the chats a little bit to our topics for the week. So let's start with at the top here with Brandon Tran, who said, non-Star Wars question, do you think Peacemaker season 2 will be good since it's a sequel to Superman and Peacemaker season 1 was a huge success? Yeah, I definitely think it'll be good. Uh, it's season 1 was great, and Superman, I really loved Superman, so I'm expecting good things. I mean, really, James Gunn since Guardians of the Galaxy to me hasn't made anything that I haven't liked. And Peacemaker plays more into his traditional strengths, violence, uh, comedy, all of that type of stuff. Superman really is a little bit more outside of the box for him in terms of what he traditionally writes. So, and we already have proof of concept with season 1. I'm just very excited to see what surprises are in store. They've really been hyping it up. John Cena and James Gunn have been really hyping it up that it's the start of the DC universe. Truly, like Superman was the thing that really set it forward, but this is going to open up the universe, and I'm really interested to see how. I mean, I know in season 1, without spoiling too much in case you guys haven't seen it, there are basically full connections to the DCEU. So I'm also interested to see how much of this is actually connected to like how much of season 1 is still technically part of this canon. Like I know it's very loose right now, and it sounds like just in general most of Suicide Squad minus the things that are connected to Peacemaker is also kind of not the part of the canon anymore. It sounds like they're recently it sounds like they're getting a new Harley Quinn. They're getting new actors for pretty much everything besides John Cena as Peacemaker. So we'll see, but yeah, very excited to watch it, and I definitely think it will be good.
Yeah, I'm excited definitely to check it out. I never got around to Peacemaker, but everybody would tell me about the opening dance sequence and intro and all that. So looking forward to just that alone. I've heard rumors that their season 2 is gonna start with, like, a lot of, like, "Hey, like, r last scene on Peacemaker, and it'll just be, like, a lot of the highlights of season 1, but just, like, DCU corrected, while still leaving the door open to stuff like you said, like the Suicide Squad, characters that have continued throughout that property who were there before. I mean, it's still gonna be pretty exciting. I know this season, from the looks of it, is gonna deal with, like, a lot of, dimensional portals too, like Superman did, so it'll be pretty interesting to see if there's gonna be alternate realities and stuff kinda encroached upon by Peacemaker, by Maxwell Lord, whoever it is, right? Excited. I will say I'm excited for sure. I don't know. I don't know. I'm excited for the show. It's got, what, 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is even higher than season 1. John Cena, I don't think he's not to the level Dave Bautista is as an actor, wrestler turned actor, but he's no slouch, and he's chosen good projects. He's worked well with Gunn before. I think he got a big cheer, honestly, in both my viewings of Superman, whenever he showed up, when he cameoed on there, right? So this is a character that, 5 years ago, people have been like, "Who? What? Why?" And now it's like, "Yeah, Peacemaker, guys." So, definitely excited. I think it's gonna be good. Everything indicates that it's even more better received than the season 1 was.
Well, and I think really this is the role that's taken John Cena beyond like the just the joke kind of character. Like, yes, it's still a comedy, but he's turned into somebody who can actually do comedy and is actually very funny. You're not just like kind of making fun of John Cena anymore. Like he is actually very funny. And so since Suicide Squad and then into this show, he's done such a great job of transforming himself and taking certain roles that have made him into a little bit more of a not really a serious actor in terms of like the dramatic heft of his roles, but a serious actor in terms of like he actually is taking projects that are good and he's not the weakest link in it like he would have been before where he was just the goofy guy in there for a little bit, right? um the Rock has kind of had a different trajectory with his career where he's always taken roles where he's like the hero, but he's not necessarily a comedian. He and recently, some things with The Rock have made him like that kind of image of him have to kind of be rethought. But yeah, I think John Cena has been, so funny lately, and he's been so many good things and been so good in so many things that he's definitely an addition to the DC universe and something that I'm very excited to see how this all plays out. I believe Guy Gardner is supposed to be in it as well, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited to see that and just see how it all connects because I'm so excited for the Lantern show next year. And I can't wait to see how this kind of transitions into that, considering this is our first live action show truly in this DCU. And that's following up. And they're both made by HBO. So it's going to be, I would imagine, something that maybe not a lot of crossover, but in style, they might be setting up that next show, especially because Green Lantern, as famous as he is, and if you read comic books, as awesome and as beloved as he is, and the core Green Lantern core has been, and even Guy Gardner's warm reception in Superman, it's not necessarily a bankable media franchise. We've only had like two Green Lantern things ever, really. It was the terrible movie and the animated show, which was pretty good, but underwatch, especially compared to Superman and Batman. So definitely looking forward to it and seeing what comes out of it. Brandon's next question was non-Star Wars question, but don't know if you guys played the original Lego Batman games growing up. But does Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight from Gamescom 2025 look fun? I haven't gotten a chance to watch the trailer. I did see that it was announced today. I did play all the original Lego Batman games and even the most recent Lego DC game, which I believe was the Legion of Superheroes one. I forgot what the name was, but it was the dark the villains one. Maybe it's DC Super Villains. That sounds about right. That one was even pretty fun. It had the crime syndicate as like the main villains, and the rest of the villains were trying to take them on. That one was even fun. So I've always had a good time with the Lego DC games, and Lego Batman 2 really was a huge shift and change in the Lego formula. It's like, one of the most important games that they've ever released in terms of changing up their style and changing the way you unlock characters and the more open world formats and the way you interact between levels and all that type of stuff. So yeah, that was a really big game for them. And I've always enjoyed their games. Looking forward to this one, but I haven't got to see the trailer yet. But if it's going back to maybe a little bit more Batman centric, I don't know if you've seen the trailer, Brandon, or you, Cynic, but if it's going back to more Batman centric, that would be really cool as well. Because the last few, basically since the second Lego Batman game, they've all been, fully DC. And as much as I love that, it would be cool to go back to those original roots because Lego Batman 1 was surprisingly good for a Batman only game.
Yeah, I saw the trailer. They are definitely doing a lot of stuff from Batman movies, like, you see the tumbler, you see the car chase with the Batmobile and, like, the walking, after the car split, but it's not Oz Cobb, alright? It looks like more just the classic Penguin. My understanding is they're gonna do scenes pulled directly from old, like, the major movies, but then tell its own Batman story, like, that
That's cool.
Batman the Batman in 2022 is kinda like year 1, year 2 Batman, and then you can transition into maybe something from the animated series or, like, from the yeah, from that or Justice League, and then you might transition or you might go straight into Batman, Begins or Dark like, at the Batman Begins, we get to see a little bit of the trainings of that, so that might be set before the Batman stuff that's inspired for year 2, and then we might transition to Dark Knight, and then Dark Knight Returns, and then because we do see a Bane in there, and he's very much inspired by the Bane we see. He's just like a classic, like, big Bane, but he doesn't really have, like, the Venom grips and connections. He has more like the Tom Hardy Bane mask on, and I think we see a lot of, like, Batman 1989 and Batman Returns looks too to that character, so I think it's gonna be a blend of everything and then taking probably some DCU inspiration. I'm very unsure how the DCU inspiration will work because it doesn't really line up per se if they're gonna watch all the other live action films, like, let's say, like, Dark Knight Rises, unless he, like, comes back and he's much older and then they play it out more like the comic does, right? So, there's gonna be some very interesting ways of approaching the story. I think they're just trying to tell, like, a whole career arc of Batman, but they're just using some of the best scenes in the movies as, like, "We're gonna build a whole level around this and story around this," and yeah, I mean, it looked pretty good. I thought for a minute they weren't even gonna use any of the voices. I'm always a fan of, like, them doing the grunts and not really having, like, actual dialogue. There is actual dialogue, but there seems like a nice little blend of everything. But then again, I could also be a little wrong. Maybe it is a fully original thing, and then you can just jump through, like, an open world and go play so, like, "Oh, this is, like, an iconic version of the Batman that you can play here," and stuff like that. Not quite sure. I think it's supposed to just be like a commemoration of all the live action Batman movies and piecing a whole story kinda shared between all of them.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's something that I'm definitely interested then. If it's like a legacy, it's really a celebration of the legacy of Batman's history. Like that's something really cool. Hopefully, they bring in some comic arcs and stuff too that are really important. But yeah, I would love that. So definitely got to check out that trailer. I'll check it out right after we finish the stream. Next up is Critical Thinker, who says, "What's your favorite depiction of Luke Skywalker outside of the films?" I'd probably pick either Shadows of Mindor, Heir to the Empire, or the Swarm War. Yeah, I mean, you've hit on two of my favorites for sure. Shadows of Mindor is really great. I think the Thrawn trilogy, though, is the one that to me is still one of my favorites just because it is that next step for him. Even if it is a little dated, I guess, in terms of the way it looks at the Jedi as a whole, compared to what we eventually learn in the prequels, because the Thrawn trilogy came out way before the prequels. Um, but still, even the lessons he learns there, not just with Jerus, but also Mara, the Luke turning fully into the Luke Skywalker Jedi Master, really there, not necessarily in terms of power, but the way he's able to, you know, take this person who wants to kill him for all the books and then make her a friend and then eventually marry her, and they have children together. Like that story arc for Luke is kind of just the definition of who he is in Legends, especially. He's this the ultimate redeemer, really. He's always able to look beyond your flaws or a person's flaws and find the best in them. And yeah, it gets him into trouble plenty of times, especially politically, throughout the EU, but he's still that person. And even when he, is in his darkest moments and something like Legacy of the Force. It is a lot of the stuff that's attributed to what Zahn originally does there that is ultimately what builds his character into who he is in some of those later things. So I think that's personally my favorite depiction of the character after the films. I think my favorite all time, I know you said no films, is definitely Return of the Jedi. It's just still my favorite of his. But New Jedi Order does a lot of great stuff with Luke too. He can be a little aloof sometimes, um, a little bit silent in the early books. The series definitely wants you to get more attached to the younger characters versus Luke right off the bat. But when Luke jumps into the story, when he has a more active role, and especially some of the stuff you see with him and Mara, like his initial forays into being a father and being a husband, a lot of that stuff is really great. And then, you can also add Survivor's Quest to that. It's a really good depiction of Luke as well with Mara. So I really like those two. I'm trying to think of anything else, but yeah, I think those are really it. I mean, Thrawn trilogy has always been, again, like, not to compare it directly to the sequels, but like Thrawn trilogy has always been the true sequel because it takes place so close to Return of the Jedi that you see a true transformation and continuation of the version of Luke you see there into, an even further along Luke. Like in the sequels we got, it's such a big time gap that you can't see all of the changes in Luke's life from point A to point B. And so the Thrawn trilogy is really nice because you see him take that next step while it's also close enough to Return of the Jedi that he still feels very much so like the version you see in that film. And since that's my favorite version of Luke, seeing like basically Return of the Jedi Luke, but just a little bit more worldly, a little bit more powerful, a little bit more sure of himself, but still learning, all of that I really do love.
Yeah, I mean, I agree fully. It's heir to the Empire look for me for sure. By the time we get to Last Command, it's just a wonderful arc with Mara. I will throw in Jedi Search specifically because that's the book that he has the biggest appearance in throughout the trilogy. Each
Mhm.
book kind of gets worse after that, but I think for the most part he is written quite well because you're balancing a lot of like the force powers that he's grown through, especially with Dark Empire. That is a book that trilogy that kinda tries to address Dark Empire, but Jedi Search is really the only one that does for in my mind, and it's more by, like, showcasing, like, the strength that he's gained over the years after he's kinda gotten through that whole mentality with Mara and, like, convincing her to do the right thing to be good and all that. It's like, well, if you're gonna be a Jedi Master, you need to have the powers, right? Jorus was wrong, but you still need to level it up, right? You can't just be bailed out by the second most evil man in the galaxy being your father. That's not gonna always happen, right? So seeing how like he kind of goes through all these different challenges, like to this day, it's still kind of ingrained in my mind how he like recruits Gantoris on like that magma world that he lives on when they're always like harvesting stuff in between like these breaks of the lava flows and all that. And he just literally walks on fire to like convince him like this is what you need to be doing. Like you can sense when like these quakes and all these and the lava will flow out, right? But I can teach you to actually fully harness that, and I can actually teach you how to like rise above it and all that. Like there's one thing that I feel like is a little downplayed about the Bantam is like they did at least try to make him do some really cool things with the Force. It's just they happen to start doing it of like, oh, he's just gonna sit on air, right? Like that stuff was like, okay, now you're just doing it excessively. But when it was done right, like he does in Jedi Search, where he's like, how else am I gonna recruit students? You can't just get them by purely off of philosophy. Sometimes you need to prove to some people, like, hey, this is what the Force can really train you to do, and take what your struggles are and move you past them, beyond them, right? I thought that was actually quite good. I think that's a nice little evolution of the character that at some point actions do speak louder than words, right? He can embody it all he wants, but if he's going to recruit people to then learn his philosophy, that's probably going to be have more an effect. So I've always found that stuff about Jedi Search to be pretty great. It's just once the academy starts, it kind of gets all wishy washy, and then you realize like why I Jedi kind of has to exist to like knock him down a peg. And again, like Liam said, all the stuff with Kip Duran, that's like a huge chunk of like why the politicians start really hating on him for very good reasons. You don't really just accept the Sun Crusher destroying Krita and like the entire solar systems. Luke destroyed the Death Star because it was just they had to. The rebellion had to, or else Yavin is destroyed. The entire rebellion is destroyed. There's no chance of New Republic. You can understand it, and he always talks about it in books how he hates it. But Kip, he's not. as remorseful as he could be, honestly, for quite a while. And Luke is kind of more remorseful for him and actually trying to take actions for him. So I do have struggles with that for sure. Um, Shadows of Mindor, I do get that. I just haven't read it in full, so I can't really make an argument for that. I'm pretty curious about why you like Swarmore. I think Swarmore is where, like, you get that first depiction of Electric Judgment, and that's kinda where people really start going like, "Okay, just because he's the good guy doesn't mean there shouldn't be some limitations on what he's learned and what he's done." So, I think that was, like, one of the biggest things that came out of that, that people were not super happy about, and, I mean, people were just confused about the Swarmore in general. Like, everything with Jason, anytime you say something, you're like, "Dude, you're so weird." Like, that's kinda how everyone reacts to Jason in that book. But I think that kinda covers up for a lot of the depiction of, um yeah, but okay, he still uses electric judgment at some point. I don't know if it's exactly in Swarm War, but it's just weird to me that, like, that's something that can be taken as a concept. I know Plo Koon does it too in Legends. It's just such a weird thing. Yeah, okay, he uses it at the end of New Jedi Order, but New Jedi Order has a different concept, the whole unifying force. By the time you reach Swarm War and once you reach into Legacy of the Force, everything's kinda gone back to the black and white of it. Yeah, they've kinda, like, stepped away from any of the really, like, big advances and steps they've taken by the end of New Jedi Order about looking at the Force and all that. So I don't like that. Even if timeline wise I got it wrong, I still don't love stuff like that happening. That doesn't really feel like Luke to me. Like the stuff I talked about in Jedi Search, where he's actually trying to like show like ways of improving your life and show like how you can use these skills to actually benefit the people you care for that you have to take care of. That's always spoken more to me about Luke than the stuff that we see by the end of New Jedi Order.
Critical Thinker's next question is: how do you think Star Wars can balance between giving books important material and still avoiding stepping on the toes of TV and film? I don't think there's any real balance unless Disney just decides to do one of two things. One, they have to decide what are they going to do with film and TV? Like what specific things do they want to save? Because the philosophy of like, well, don't touch Luke in between the Return of the Jedi and the Force Awakens because we might do something with him. That's you can't wait forever. We've been waiting 10 years already since the Force Awakens came out. You still can't just like gatekeep the character forever until we eventually have no interest, right? Like, so they've got to pick and choose what they actually might want to do. Or the more realistic option is they just go full George Lucas Legends EU universe, which is we'll let authors tell stories that are great and compelling, but we also might retcon them. So canon kind of goes bye-bye, or they just put an asterisk on certain stories and are like, okay, this is like hard canon. This is could be canon. They have different tiers like we used to have. They've already started kind of doing that. It's been less effective to the books rather than the comic books, which have gotten retconned a lot recently. Um, but yeah, so that's been something that's coming, and I think it's going to happen eventually. So I think that they should just do that. Like basically, we've already kind of peeled the band-aid back, but it hasn't been fully ripped off yet. If they just came out and were like, "Hey, canon was a cool idea. We thought it would be great, but we want to tell compelling stories in our books. We want to tell stories that you guys actually care about. We want to tackle different things that would be really interesting, and we also want to do that in film and TV. So as of now, we'll try to not step on the toes of other things, but we could if we wanted, if we need to, and we feel like that's best for the story. That would probably be the best play. So that would be the like logistical way to do that. The other thing they can do is just do what they've been doing with like something like the High Republic. Pick a point in time that you'll probably never touch with film or TV, whether that's far, far future. If right now they're focused on post sequels and like reclaiming that post sequel timeline, as well as building up the New Republic era between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, if those are their two big focuses and they think, okay, for the next 15, 20 years, like these two will be where we tell most of our stories, just like in the last 10 years, most of our stories have come from the dark times or the Clone Wars or in between the original trilogy films. If they think that's where our stories are coming from, then say, okay, you guys can build your own Dawn of the Jedi esque thing, your own legacy esque thing in the books or the comics, and just jump way into the future or way into the past and tell a story that we probably will never contradict fully. Maybe don't go like too crazy into the origins of the Force because we do have a Dawn of the Jedi movie coming up. But you could do something about early Jedi tribes that maybe takes place between that and the Old Republic and tell some story, some unique transition built on the lore that we've already kind of established for where we want to go with Dawn of the Jedi. So they could do something like that. I think the most safe time period, obviously, would be to go in the far future because nothing would contradict it. The other thing they can do is now we have the High Republic, but that's still only a couple hundred years away from Phantom Menace. There's still like a 700, 600 year gap between what was the Old Republic and what is the High Republic. Tell more stories in there. They could just jump into the past even more so and just kind of stay in that area. But yeah, I think that's how they tell more important stories. And it depends. I kind of it kind of depends what you mean by important, right? If that's not important to you, then it's and the only thing that's important is taking the characters that we know from the films and telling stories about them that's significant, then I don't think we ever really see that from them, not until they're fully ready to commit to retconning things in their own canon. But if important stories is just like developing a period and an era of Star Wars lore that hasn't been developed before, which to me that's what important stories would be. I mean, yes, obviously the most important things would be tackling what Luke does or what Han does or what Obi-Wan does or whatever. Um, but to me, a secondary tier of importance is just defining lore, right? The Old Republic is important, even though it doesn't connect to the Skywalkers, because it defines an era of lore. So if you're going to define eras of lore, I think that's important storytelling. So I think that's the most likely thing they'll do is just pick another time period that they haven't announced yet for film or TV. They probably won't announce anytime soon and do their next High Republic. But we shall see if that's the next thing they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree a lot with the latter portion. It's just hard, and now that we have the Disney money to justify a book universe, like, it's just why would they? Like, if they have, writers and artists that, like, have done great work in the Legends era, they're bringing them in as consultants oftentimes for the TV shows and so all that when you're bringing in those characters like Thrawn and all, so and we are still getting some incredible stories, it's not as common, right? And I think a large chunk of the EU is not great. I will say that. I don't think a lot of the Bantam era is all that great. Like you can have a book as wonderful as like the New Rebellion, but then you also have something like the Crystal Star, right? Like it wasn't great to start off with. I only think the EU is truly great in the New Jedi Order. After that, I don't agree with a lot of what Denning does when he starts kind of taking over. I think Darkness could have been a start of a multiple sort of series that then bridged us into the Legacy of the Force because we just do not do enough with like the fallout of New Jedi Order and everything that's kind of happening. Legacy of the Force for large parts works, but I still feel it's rushed and all that. So I agree with Liam. Like, you have to be willing to publicly say we're going to be retconning our story for when it makes sense. But then you start kind of losing audiences' trust in the visual product because it's like, oh, if these cartoons that I watch, which are such a huge basis of canon, honestly, and you're
Yeah.
saying, oh, that's all gone. Like, it wasn't well received by a lot of people who love the Clone Wars multimedia project of the 2003 era, right? They loved Gendy Tartakovsky's work. We did too, for sure. But the books and the comics around it are all basically like gone, right? Luckily, we've got a book like Star Wars Brotherhood now that's like kind of recanonized huge chunks of volume one of the Genndy Tartakovsky Star Wars Clone Wars show. But if you were to suddenly say like, yeah, that thing that happened in '08 Clone Wars, right? Like it's completely wrong, and like those characters actually lived and all that. And you've had authors like Karen Travis who was like very upset that Republic Commando like depicted stuff in the Citadel arc that just did not line up, right? Now, if you're suddenly doing that, now you're getting people upset who are actually working on Star Wars, and they're like, "Oh, how do I in fact know if my story is going to be worthwhile and important?" And then suddenly you have to go through a whole reorganization, and then the story group gets a lot more critical. like feedback and they don't really love that. Like now they're starting to see more negative. I just don't see that. It's like you'd have to start telling stories that are like how Liam said, like an adaptation almost of the EU, and just kind of go at that, blend in stuff that worked in canon, and then connect stuff all together there. It has to be like vaguely in line with what you think happened, but like a slightly like Earth 2 version versus Earth 1 or something like that kind of storytelling. That's how I would look at it. And I still think we can get stuff happening with errors that are fleshed out. I mean, critical thinker, you're saying you don't want them to feel like gap fillers and irrelevant stories. Absolutely agree. That is what the High Republic is. It's not irrelevant, and I do agree it is a bit hampered by its storytelling being so close to the prequels. I mean, frankly, it made a big mistake jumping from phase 1 to phase 2 and phase 3, phase 2 being set 150 years before phase 1 and not actually exploring a lot of, like, that stuff where you could have really developed a lot more world building, a lot more of the crazier cool things happening in the galaxy and all that. There is questions about, like, hyperspace lanes, expansion of the Republic and all that, that the High Republic never truly answers, but those are still big stories. I don't think that would qualify by your categorization either of relevant stories. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you've actually read anything other than maybe Light of the Jedi too. So we've read the whole thing. We have a lot of criticisms of its execution in the multimedia stuff, but it's big. It truly is big. So I'd love to see stuff like that. Take what you've learned from the High Republic, you can go further and further back. I mean, you can do a lot of KOTOR comic level storytelling, tell a huge story set during the Old Republic era, still have those games, still have a TV show and everything around it. You can still do those things without having crazy crossover. I think that's the thing. There's always this weird feeling in current day Star Wars that everything's got to be connected and intertwined and interweaved, that you have to like eventually reach the biggest format of it. You have to reach the most accessible format of the Star Wars content of that era. And that's fine for cameos and all that, but once you start like making it like, oh, chunk a huge chunk of their main story is now in this adult novel when they actually started off in the comics, doesn't really work that way, right? And that's something we both have a lot of criticisms for the High Republic. So yeah, I think making books interesting, that's not really an issue. It's just more making eras and mediums feel fully embodied, fully fleshed out, and without like kind of cutting the legs out from underneath them. I think that's more the big problem. I still think we need gap fill stories though. You don't think we can't get like a whole like Jedi Academy like 10 book series for Luke? I think that'd be fascinating. I think it's a shame, frankly, that EU never really spends a huge amount of time with the Academy. And even in Jedi Academy series, he's not really leading the Academy because he's knocked out by Exar Kun, right? So I think you can do quite a lot of that stuff in canon. I would prefer animation and having that crossover with books and stuff like that, or you do like, "Oh, here's the first 5 years, here's the next 5 years." Stuff like that would be pretty interesting to play off of. I think stopgaps still work, but I agree, the books do need to still feel like they have more weight and stuff, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Luke, Han, Leia, and those characters. You can still do big eras, super far back into the past, super far into the future. Just if you're gonna go so far into the future, almost make it as entirely disconnected from the Skywalker's influence, right? That's one thing that I don't love about Legacy. It is essentially designed as like a remix of everything, and it's fine, but then it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way that Legacy was finally the place and time they thought, hey, we actually have to deal with the Vong fallout here, and like what would be the possible redemption of them and all that. Takes them 100 something years in the timeline for that to really happen. I get it. You killed trillions of people, but if we're letting Luke Skywalker dictate people like Kip Duron having billions of people killed off, and if not trillions, and kind of get like, hey, it's okay, we'll make it work, right? Within like 5 6 years, I I think you can do this. You could have done the same thing with the Vong. So I get what you're saying, but I think there are definitely criticisms of the EU that have to be addressed too to like make that point. So yeah, yeah, I agree. Books are less fun, but if you told me like, hey, I can see Timothy Zahn spend another whole decade writing like the whole Chiss ascendancy, write about everything from the Thrawn era, before the Thrawn era, after the Thrawn era, and it never has to cross over, I consider that significant in big stories.
Well, I think too the real optimal world word a lot of people I think are really reaching for when it comes to significance is more memorable than
Yeah.
significant. Like, yes, I agree that like canon stories a lot of times are less memorable, even if they end up being great books because they don't add something to a lot of the characters that they're tackling. And I think that's the biggest thing canon has to get away from, is saying, hey, let's do a book about Obi-Wan, but it's going to be an event that's never referenced ever again or in anything else, and there's going to be no follow-up to it. It's just going to be a moment in time where he did this one
Yeah.
thing and then it's over. And like I think that's what they need to do, is you can tell these stories in gaps in between people's lives. Obviously, they're not going to be referenced in the films because the films have already come out, but you can make multiple books about them, right? Trilogies, duologies, pick back up in a different time period where it carries with the same characters that you read in that previous book. That's something that canon hasn't done well, because with all these standalone books, it just feels like we're reading one, it moves on to the next thing. If you still tell stories within the original trilogy context, but there's a story with Obi-Wan that's when he's a Padawan, and then you do a Clone Wars era story with Obi-Wan where it has the same characters and it tells a story that really plays off of some of the original fears or traumas he went through as a Padawan, and now they're part of the Clone Wars. That's what Legends did well, is it picked up pieces constantly across different mediums and said, these stories are going to be important for this part of the character's mythos, this part of the character's psychology. That's what canon hasn't done well. And so I think even in bad stories in the EU, a lot of times they were willing to take risks with character, or they were willing to take risks with lore to where they were memorable, even if you didn't like what they did. Canon has often, like we've said, like I think the lows of canon are so much higher than the lows of legends, but sometimes you'd prefer those lows of legends because they tried something. And canon, a lot of times, the worst canon books or the most meh canon books feel like they didn't try anything. They just were like, we need a book about something. Who do we write a book about? Oh, let's write a book about Kira today, or let's write a book about Vernestra today, or let's write a book about the Bad Batch today. And then eventually it just is like, are you ever going to deal with some of this stuff again? Because I think that's the big thing too, is just like, you don't have to cross over with the films, but if you create their own little like book universes around these stories, even if they're never referenced in the films or shows, they still start to feel more important because the reader's rewarded multiple times over. And that's what Zahn's done so well between his Thrawn books, is even in his canon Thrawn trilogy, the loose Thrawn trilogy, not much time passes. Like the first Thrawn book is, yes, an origin story, and it's like the first real origin story he does for Thrawn in the Empire, EU or canon. So it kind of tackles new ground, even though it recontextualizes Missed Encounter and stuff like that. But then after that, he works in the really tight confines of Rebels, but yet still tells stories that feel significant and important to the character of Thrawn, because each story builds off of the next one. Even if they're not referenced in Rebels, they still feel significant to that character in the novels. And so I think we need to get into more of that type of storytelling if you really want to make things important. They have to be memorable. But where I would disagree is like, we don't constantly have to push new lore, because books used to do that, yes, but that was because we were not, at that point, Lucas was not planning on doing the sequels. At
Yeah.
that point, we were not getting anything post Return of the Jedi anytime soon. At that point, we had already had 20 years worth of stories post Return of the Jedi to continue working in, and so they're never going to be like that again. We're never getting a new Jedi Order for Luke and Han and Leia. Like, those characters are never having their next canon new Jedi Order. We're never having the canon Legacy of the Force. We're never having the canon Fate of the Jedi. But we could get stories that create new characters and tell things that feel like they've carved out their own spot. And that's where I feel like going into the future is probably the smartest, safest bet, because you can do anything you want. And yes, you can kind of establish this history, these like little seeds that have spread throughout the galaxy, but like,
Yeah.
don't do it kind of like Ninth Jedi-esque, where it's like it's not definitive. You can still tell plenty of stories in between the gaps of far future without it feeling like, well, now they're gap filler stories, because important things happen to characters in between films and in between stories without them necessarily being gap filler. They just have to feel like they richly enhance the character we see. And and it's tough with characters from the original trilogy, but I think with the sequels, especially Luke, the depiction of Luke is so different from Return of the Jedi that there's a lot of space to tell rich stories that absolutely change and alter his character because he's already completely altered in The Last Jedi. He's not the same person whatsoever. And so by doing that, now you've left it's a flaw of the film because you fundamentally changed the character off screen, but it's something that allows an expanded universe to have plenty of rich material because now any story you tell with Luke can get him closer to that, right? So there's a lot of things that they can do, but I think it's not necessarily about defining lore. It's about creating characters that feel memorable. And that's why to me High Republic still feels like a very worthwhile expansion into Star Wars, even if yes, it deals with the thousand-year peace and so it can't have a full-scale war. And if you went closer to the Old Republic again and you told the next story, maybe 300 years after the Old Republic, 600 years before Phantom Menace, you would have that same issue, but the characters I met along the way in the High Republic still felt memorable to me. Like I'll still think about the struggles of Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann as we get to the Phantom
Yeah,
Menace.
definitely.
The way they struggled and fought for a galaxy that started to change, right? Like those things, you can develop strong character and memorable character to the point where even a story that galactically might feel insignificant still is powerful for the ultimate outcomes of what come in the future. So I think that's the way you continue to look at it, right? I think the High Republic's a great experiment. It had a lot of really, really high highs. It had a lot of lows. Nothing was abysmally awful though. And so if you figure out a way to unite those things, tell stories that are important for their mediums, make every medium feel a little less bogged down by the initiative as a whole and let them all thrive in their own way. I think those are the lessons they can learn for the future, and hopefully they continue to take those lessons and run with them as we move into the next era of Star Wars publishing now that High Republic's over. Let's get into our next topic, and then we'll get back to the chat because I want to cover this topic before we end the stream tonight. We're almost an hour and a half into the stream. So again, there are a lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. So please do us a favor and like the video. It's easy. Just scroll down and hit the like button. This is your last chance to really get your questions in. We'll probably go for about another 40-ish minutes or so. So keep sending in those questions. Excuse me. Keep sending in those questions. We will get to as many as possible. If you want to make sure you get yours on the stream tonight, hit that super chat button and send us a donation to the channel. It greatly helps out our channel. Bumps you up to the top. You can also join our Patreon and YouTube membership programs to get priority chat access. All right, let's talk about what Ron Howard said about Solo, because I think Solo, a Star Wars story, one of many things in the Lucasfilm era under Disney that like you want to learn a lot more about the behind the scenes and what happened and what really went on. There's a lot of like he said, she said about this whole thing, and we kind of know the gist of it. But obviously, somebody who was intimately involved with this whole thing is Ron Howard, who has been talking in an interview about how he was brought on board with this project. And it's definitely the most information I think we've ever gotten about the ultimate hiring of Ron Howard and the way Lucasfilm was at least kind of feeling, or at least the way he interpreted the way Lucasfilm was feeling as they moved on from Lord and Miller on to Ron Howard's direction. So, in an interview with Variety, Ron Howard revealed that he was invited to lunch by Kathleen Kennedy one day and found out that Jonathan Kasdan was also going to be there. From there, he was informed that Lucasfilm had decided to part ways with directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller over creative differences on Solo, a Star Wars story, and that they were looking for Ron Howard to steady the ship. Once he came and looked at the footage they had already shot, so again, I think this is really important because they showed him a cut of the movie that Lord and Miller shot. So it's always been kind of up in the air on how much did they reshoot and how much did Lord and Miller finish before they were let go. It sounds like they had enough to show a full cut of the film to Ron Howard. He said it once he looked at the footage, he spotted the problem immediately. It was consistent with what had previously been reported to him by Kathleen Kennedy and Kasdan that Lord and Miller went off book a little too much, and it didn't fit Lucasfilm's vision for what the film should have been. quote, "They basically said, 'We've reached a creative impasse with Lord and Miller. Would you ever consider coming in?'" This is Ron Howard saying, "I looked at some edited footage and saw what was bothering them. There was a studio that liked the script that they had and liked it the way it was and wanted a Star Wars movie," in quotes. But there was a disconnect early on tonally, and they weren't convinced that what Phil and Chris were doing was working effectively. I couldn't judge that because I didn't see enough of it to know, but they were sure once I said, "Okay, I think I can do the script, and I think I understand what you want of this script." They said, "We'd want to reshoot a lot of it." I looked at the whole movie and then pointed out some things that I thought were great. And Phil and Chris were incredibly gracious throughout the process. They were just seeing two different movies. So I came in, I had a blast, but there's nothing personal about that film whatsoever. It's still just a shame. I can't wait for Phil and Chris's next movie. So that's a really telling quote to me. I mean, obviously, it's a really long quote, um, but there are a few things to pull out of it. One, the first thing is he watched pretty much a whole movies of Solo. He watched most of the footage. He says he contradicts himself a couple times in the quote. One, he says he didn't see enough of it to really judge their movie, but he also says that he watched all their footage and was like, they didn't have a Star Wars movie together, which I think is an interesting thing. Um, to really say about this, right, is the basically that they thought that the way Lord and Miller directed the film, and from a lot of the rumors, they were really letting their actors ad lib. They were really letting a lot of improv on set. They were using the script as an outline. They were really going all in on like what were the actors wanting to do on set, what were they kind of feeling that day. And in Lucasfilm's mind and Ron Howard's mind, they weren't really capturing Star Wars. And that was kind of the basis behind, at least in his opinion, why they parted ways with Lord and Miller. It wasn't just that they weren't capturing the script, but it didn't feel Star Warsy enough for them. And they moved on to Ron Howard. That to me is incredibly telling. He also says that after he did meet with George when he decided to take the project, and George's main bit of advice was don't forget it's for 12-year-old boys, which is something George Lucas has always said and makes a lot of sense. But yeah, Sonic, what are your thoughts on Ron Howard kind of confirming all the reports we've heard about the departure of Lord and Miller through this whole thing, kind of confirming that they were really far into shooting, like almost done, had enough for him to basically get a vision of the film by just watching the footage and comparing it to the script, and also saying that it didn't feel like Star Wars to them, and that's why they hired him to fix it.
Well, I think it makes sense. It always has made sense why they hired Ron Howard. He's kind of like known for just delivering very solid, very good polished films, like got a great relationship. He's only kind of fallen off here since after Solo, honestly, with his production. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think the way it was described as a production, we've been hearing a lot more tidbits this past year in general too, but it lines up with a lot of the criticisms that Lord and Miller have been getting. They're so committed to like kind of finding out stuff on production. It's that like it's like that's great and all, but that's a lot of money that just kind of goes to waste. Like I think a big story that kind of leaked, or at least a big tidbit that kind of leaked was that hey, like they'd have, like, the Corellia sets and all that with, like, hundreds of crew members, but then they'd only be working, like, 3 or 4 of them, and, like, they would just be like, "Okay, try this, try that," and they take so many takes just to get something super quick, and if you read more of that, like, Howard kinda got a lot of the stuff done in, like, 3, 4 takes. They were taking, like, a ridiculous high volume, right? Like, yeah, sure, I mean, film today doesn't necessarily mean film reels back then where you're, like, counting every single bit. There's a little bit more of a digitization factor to it, but it's still film. It's still a physical medium. You can't just, like, be like, "Oh, we'll go run off and find, like, another 50, hey, like, meters worth just to, like, do for 3 more takes." Like, okay, like, sure, why not? I know there's, like, a sense of also, like, the humor of it. Like, we've seen Lord& and Miller, they can be very funny people, like, what is it? The Mitchell versus the Machines was, like, an animated movie that they were, like, producers on.
Lego
Obviously
movies.
yeah, they're on Spider-Verse, the Lego movies, like, it makes a lot of sense for that. But we've also heard a lot of criticisms for their animation, especially around Spider-Verse, with how, like, unique of a style it is and just how it's kinda changed the animation industry right now. Like, to say they haven't had influence through what they were looking for and what they tasked all these incredible artists to work on, sure, full respect there. But then they're saying stuff like, hey, people are talking up online or like telling the trades and all that, like it was a vicious cycle because anytime they had like, especially for animation, when you'd have like your storyboard set, they'd animate it and then they'd be go like, nah, that's not really what we're looking for, like let's redo the whole sequence. Like they would just throw away so many things mid-flight. And compared to the timelines that you get with film, animation is way more planned ahead. It's way more crucial at that, and they have a way smaller budget. Right, so they were working these guys to exhaustion. That was a huge criticism from a lot of people who worked on it. So, can you only imagine how they felt, especially when the story leaked? It was basically when it was announced that Beyond the Spider-Verse is gonna come out the following year, and obviously that's now more secured for, like, 2027, but, we don't even know if that's 100% accurate. I think there's a good better chance because Sony's working with Marvel for a brand new day, so having back-to-back years of Spider-Man is gonna only be in their favor. But, like, yeah, it's just they're like experimenters, serial experimenters, and it's great and all, but you have to consider like how much money you're just throwing. It's a business at the end of the day. It's not like your tour passion project that you have these young upcoming actors who are on such a low budget. Like, no, like these are big blockbuster productions, and as wonderful as they may be, they weren't ready for it in some ways, right? If they're gonna just have like a lot of the stuff in the humor as described be like Han Solo on the beach, kind of like pretending he's got thermal grenade in his mouth. Like that only works in bits and pieces. Han is a funny character. Do not get me wrong, but he's also a serious character. That's what he has layers to him. And playing like the younger version of him, less as the idealistic, naive version that transforms over the course of the film, and more of just someone a jokester throughout everything happening, especially after everything that happens with him and Kira being separated in Corellia and having him be completely humorous at every point in his life and have jokes at every 5 minutes. I'm not saying it couldn't have worked visually as a Star Wars film because there's like a lot of underrated stuff, like costuming wise, world wise, and everything from Solo. But I do wonder how much of, like, I would look at young Han Solo as a prankster, as a comedian, as someone who doesn't take things seriously, and then by the end, he has to. I never thought of that as a character trait for him. I've taken that as someone, like, way too, like, overconfident in his abilities and very silly about that in a sense, but never as someone like, oh, I'm in the middle of Mimban mud trooper battle and I'm flying through the air. Let me crack a joke right now after I've landed. I've never really thought of him as that sort of character, right? Like he is a guy who's also a very physical character in his comedy. Like, yes, you might not love the special edition version with the added stormtroopers on the Death Star, but the same effect is still there, original or otherwise. He's running through that hall, screaming, yelling, runs into a bunch of stormtroopers. He's like, "Oh my god!" and then he just runs back. He's not saying any words or dialogue. It's just how Harrison carried that character, embodied the humor through that. And I don't think that was really happening. Alden is a wonderful actor. We've seen it in like Weapons and everything. We've seen it as Ezekiel State and Ironheart. He has that range to play a younger Han Solo. But I think even if Ron Howard went for more of a safer direction and what Kazan was envisioning, I still take that any day over what Lord and Miller, especially with like a lot of the stuff that they're criticism that they've been getting more recently, more and more over time. It just doesn't seem like $250 million films fully shot, in a big franchise that has expectations, that has legacy to it, is necessarily the right space for them to work in. Something like Spider-Verse is like them being allowed to like fully bring a comic book to life and transform it. That's inherently the whole concept of Miles Morales, that it changes all your understandings of how you look at Spider-Man. I don't wanna look at Han Solo totally dramatically different. I wanna understand why Han Solo eventually becomes the character that he is in New Hope, and I think Ron Howard, even if you call it a safe movie, did deliver on that.
Yeah, and I think that's the where, like, the marriage of their 2 styles could have maybe worked and been the optimal version of this whole thing, because by getting only the safe version, that's why Solo has always felt to me like the most forgettable Star Wars movie, we have. Is just it feels so safe. I've grown to appreciate it over time a little bit more because it is a pretty solid movie that has fewer flaws than some of these other things that we've gotten. But it is something that inherently is just a little less exciting. That's the thing that I've always kind of had an issue with it, is just that Star Wars, it was the first Star Wars project to me that didn't feel like an event. Like every time for me, whether it was, my childhood glasses on with Clone Wars, and I was really excited for that because I was the right age for Clone Wars, or it was the prequels when they were coming out when I was a kid, or the sequels, or even Rogue One bringing back Vader for the first time in years and stuff like that. There was always some type of reason to have an event around Star Wars. Solo, I think, was the first project that we got that I just didn't have that much enthusiasm for. And when I saw it, it kind of met that, right? It was like, ah, that was fine. But it also never made me go like, whoa, really the only time was, I guess, Darth Maul's revealed. But still, even that was like, it was just exactly how you expected it to go, especially if you read AC Crispin's work. There's a lot of stuff pulled from there, and it's a simplified version of that, plus adding a bunch of other things that we don't really need. And so, yeah, that's where like the experimentation from Lord and Miller really could have helped the movie in some ways, but I don't know if jokes were that way. So if they decided to experiment with some plot, maybe came up with an idea like, oh, it'd be cool to add this in. Maybe we'll do a little reshoot at the end of that we didn't have scheduled, but we'll come back for reshoots and add this cool little element that we came up with in. That would have been worthwhile. If it was just add jokes, I don't know if it would have made the movie better. So, yeah, we'll see. It's one of the more interesting sagas over the last 10 years, especially coming from Star Wars. But it's interesting hearing Ron Howard's thoughts on it, and hearing somebody who's usually kind of framed as being very positive and upbeat, and still positive upbeat in this quote, but like he's really telling a lot of the behind the scenes on how he came on the project. I also think one of the more interesting quotes in that too is he says, I had a blast, but there was nothing personal about that film whatsoever. I don't know if I'm trying to read whether that he's saying that it wasn't personal that he took over for Lord and Miller and like didn't have anything against them when he took over, or if he was saying he didn't really connect to the film as much because he was taking on somebody else's work and didn't like wasn't a part of the project from start to finish. I think that's another interesting quote from him. And I kind of the movie kind of feels like that. Like it doesn't feel, you don't feel the Ron Howard stamp on it all the time. Yes, you do feel like that kind of joy that he brings to a lot of filmmaking, but you don't feel like he anyone really in particular has a stamp on it. Just feels like the most paint by numbers, like follow the script Star Wars movie that we have seen really in a in a long time, or really ever. So one of the most paint by numbers Star Wars projects, I think, in general in terms of film and TV. So I don't know, interesting quotes by him. But let us know what you guys think in the chat. What do you think of Ron Howard's comments? Do you think Lord and Miller's version would have been better, or are you glad we got the Ron Howard version now that we've been, I guess, what are we, 7 years removed from Solo, going on 8 next year? Kind of crazy that it's been that long. Let's go tie in a little bit to Brandon's comment here about Spider-Verse, because it kind of piggybacks off what we were just talking about and says, when do you think Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse will drop, since it's been delayed several times? I don't even want to answer because I feel like it's impossible to tell. It was originally supposed to be a part one, part two. Part one came out in 2023. We're over 2 years past part one. It's definitely not going to be 2026 from what we've heard. It's supposed to be 2027. I feel like 27 or 28 is more likely. If they want to really go in on like post, let's say Secret Wars has a big revival for comic book movie interest, right? Maybe 28 is a good year to drop it
Mm,
because it already has a lot of acclaim. Maybe comic book movie interest has taken off again overseas, which is really where it's been struggling. Secret Wars and Doomsday really get that people going in that direction. And then if the DC or if the DCU follows it up with maybe another success with Supergirl, I doubt it will make more money internationally than Superman, unless Superman is watched within the next year overseas more. And people are like, oh, I didn't give that a chance, but now I'm interested. But you got Supergirl, and then you have whatever comes next for DC, whether it's Wonder Woman. I'm talking like big tent poles. Obviously, we're getting like Clayface and stuff, but I'm talking about like the main characters, whether it's Wonder Woman, whether it's Superman 2, whether it's Batman, whatever comes next for DCU. If there's a string of successes here in the next like 3 years of big time superhero movies, and it culminates with Secret Wars, and it's actually really great, and it does well overseas, 28 might be the smartest financially to release because at that point Marvel will be kind of restarting again their next wave of movies. Will there be a movie, unless it's a Batman movie, that's as hype that year in 2028 as Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse? Because I think it already has a big fandom, and if people overseas are interested in superheroes again, on top of the fact that they already like that movie, the people who have seen it, and everybody's already loved the
Here. Um, hopefully you guys can hear us. I think we just had a drop here. Uh,
Are we back up?
not quite, I think. Hopefully now it's starting to come back. Yeah, I think we're back now. Um, yeah, I know. I think 2028 is a possible time for it to happen. I'm still hoping that it's not delayed again. I think just it was just such a false thing to say like it's coming out the next year, like and like within 2 3 months of like the movie Across being released, people like Haley were like, "Yeah, I haven't done any line recording. I don't think there's a finished script or anything." Like they couldn't even get that stuff done. It was just like, oh boy, like if the actors aren't even looking up stuff, if they're not dealing with that, that was a little shocking to me. And I just again like we're talking about with the Ron Howard story. I I think they promised way too much. They pushed way too much on animators and artists. Just yeah, they made incredible 2 films, like but the second one took a long time to come out too. It took 5 years for that. And to suddenly say like, "Oh, we're gonna have something out in a couple years or like back-to-back years," but not actually have production happen concurrently from what we could tell, that was always like a, What's going on?" sort of deal, right? Like, that just never sat right with me. I just don't love their treatment of animators, just assuming that, it's not like how it is making live action filmmaking. And it's crazy to say that because, they broke out with the Lego movie, but it seems like they have at least a little bit more respect for live action than they do with animation. It seems like over time, they're wonderful creatives. Do not get me wrong. The reality of the situation was just like it was just a shocking thing to, like, have marketed it like that. Maybe Sony was behind that, who knows? Maybe they're in, like they never wanted that, or maybe that was, like, a negotiation tactic for getting, like, a Spider-Gwen TV show, like, that's rumored to be out. There's rumors about the Spider-Man TV show happening too. We're not really sure. The only thing that's really been pulled straight from this is, like, the Spider-Man Noir with Nicolas Cage. Kind of pl not necessarily reprising his role, but just playing that role again with a sweet looking live action costume. But, yeah, I mean, I think 2027 still holds. I think they had a big thing, I believe it was CinemaCon last year or this year, where they really try to make a big emphasis about Beyond and what they're working on. It seemed like the first concrete evidence of what they're working on too. It still is probably a little optimistic. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets delayed towards later in 2027. But I still think with Brand New Day coming out in 2026, you wanna capitalize on people being like, "Yeah, I wanna see a Spider-Man movie back-to-back years," and it's different enough, right? I see your point, Liam, about, like, hoping overseas audiences return and all that. But I don't think we necessarily had that problem with Across the Spider-Verse. It's captured a whole different audience than your MCU fans or even your DCU fans in a way. There's always parents who are like, "Yeah, if I only have to watch 2 films, why not?" Right? It's a smaller universe in itself. It's animation that people are like, "You have to watch it for the animation, not necessarily the story." So I think we have a chance for the 3rd film to kinda still get that same sort of treatment too. It'll be a little harder than convincing someone in 2023 like, "Hey, go watch on Netflix, the first Into the Spider-Verse film to watch Across the Spider-Verse." Now I'm not really sure. Are they on Disney Plus or are they also still on Netflix?
I don't believe they're on Disney Plus.
Yeah, so if they're still on Netflix, watching 2 is still not that much of a hurdle, but it's more of a hurdle than just 1 movie, and with, like, more people's attention definitely being around across for, like, the sequel and then seeing all these delays. Another massive delay would be yeah, I mean, you're gonna break the camel's back. I get it'll be another proper 5 years, but 10 years for 3 movies, it's really hard to keep an audience around for that long, so I'm hoping they can at least minimize the damage and keep it 2027. I think this would be the right time too. Like, you never got the Venom movie to have Tom Holland Spider-Man or Andrew Garfield's, right? You've had a whole Venom universe that happened with all the super villains of Spider-Man whenever interacting with Spider-Man. It would be kinda cool since we got the Prowler in Across the Spider-Verse in a cameo if we finally do get, like, Tom Holland cameoing there or, like, some like, just some like, one of his many adventures we just don't really talk about, right? Like, it'd be kinda cool to see something kinda like that or, like, a version of Tom Holland, a version of the live action characters happening just to, like, be like, "Oh, let's add a little bit of extra juice," right? But, yeah, I don't know. I just find it, like, very interesting talking to a lot of people that they don't really treat the Into the Spider-Verse, like, and Across the Spider-Verse as traditional superhero films to them. They're there for the animation and how groundbreaking it is to watch that, and because they caught up to it on Netflix as opposed to, like, "Oh my god, there's, like, 10 different movies and 15 TV shows on Disney Plus, and that's why I've fallen off on the MCU," right? It feels like that's the one thing that Sony has actually made a proper separation on, unintentionally, versus what we got with, like, all the Sony live action movies that came out, and people are like, "Is this Marvel MCU stuff or is it not?" So, I think that plays to its strengths for sure, so I hope 2027, but to be determined.
I think, I mean, I understand and agree that they're not viewed the same way, but I think box office wise, when you look at the competition levels that are going to be there for different things, right? Secret Wars can only help. And then on top of that, you have to see what Secret Wars does for Sony Spider-Verse as well, because I think they're itching, as great as these movies have done for them, they're itching for Miles Morales live action. I'm
Yeah,
sure Marvel also is interested in that if they're allowed to take the reins. I think Marvel is very interested in getting their hands on an MCU version of Venom. It's interesting to see where all of this will go, especially if you follow the trend of what Sony's done in the past. Spider-Man Homecoming 2027 or 2017, Spider-Man No Way Home or Far From Home 2019, Spider-Man No Way Home 2021. Every 2 years, even with the pandemic, those movies came out every 2 years. Do they go that direction again? Because if they do, then the next Tom Holland Spider-Man film could be 2028 as well, which could put an obstacle for Beyond coming out that year. If they want that next film to maybe tie into Beyond's events and whatever happens in Beyond, maybe Miles is somehow attached to something you see in a Secret Wars. Because I truly do believe that pretty much everything Marvel ever made, doesn't matter what studio, is going to be acknowledged in some way in Secret Wars. I mean, give or take, even the bad things. Like I could even see a Morbius like in the background cameo type of thing. Like I think they're really going to go all in because this is their last chance to do it, right? It's multiverse. It's the culmination of multiverse stuff. And the way Miles Morales was brought into 616 originally was Secret Wars. It was like the whole purpose of
yeah.
Secret Wars was to bring Miles Morales into the main Spider-Man universe. And so I think what's interesting is going to be how do they tie all that together, right? And this is its own culmination of a gigantic multiverse saga as well. If they want it to directly tie into the story of Secret Wars, then they release it before. But if maybe for some reason they're tied into Secret Wars indirectly, because the story has been written before Secret Wars was even really like a. I mean, Secret Wars has always been Marvel's end game for this phase, but it's gone through iterations of like what the story is going to be and was. So even if this Secret Wars is just kind of indirectly tied into Beyond the Spider Verse, I think there's a good possibility that they could kind of adjust some things in Beyond the Spider Verse to tag on to Secret Wars in order to not only elevate their own box office, but treat their Beyond the Spider Verse almost like the way they treated Far From Home, and like it could be an epilogue in some sort of way to Secret Wars, and then Miles could end up being in the next Spider-Man movie, in Spider-Man 5 with Tom Holland. You could maybe introduce Miles there. There could be a lot of things they can do to really tie all that stuff together. And so I think that's the most intriguing part, is like not just at this point it's so delayed that it's not even just necessarily when this movie's ready to go. It's what does it where does it fit into the hierarchy of what makes us the most money, and also what gives us the best future, because this is coming to an end. They can sure do spin-offs. They can do a 2099 spin-off. They can do a Spider-Gwen spin-off. They can do Spider-Punk like they just announced spin-off. Spider-Ham. They can do Spider-Man Noir. They could do all these spin-offs, but as we've seen with Sony in the past, and I think they've seen, there's only so much you can do box office wise if you're having spin-offs of your main series. So do they decide, hey, Miles, we can make the future Miles in live action, and then in animation maybe we go back and tell some other stories, some spin-off stories, and treat the animation medium like it's always been kind of treated, which is secondary. And that wouldn't necessarily be ideal for us as fans, but I think box office wise and the way studios think, that might be the target direction, in my opinion, where they might go. So that'll be interesting to see. But thanks for that question, Brandon. We're running out of time, everybody, so we're going to only have enough time for maybe one or two more questions, but send in any last super chats if you'd like to guarantee you get one on tonight's stream. But we're going to run down. We'll take one more question here from the top from Critical Thinker, and then the last one from Brandon, and then we'll call it a night unless we get some supers. Starting with Critical Thinker, who says, should the books be declared a separate universe like Star Trek? And should they jump the books far into the future, or commit to letting the books do big things with film characters and take that risk? So I think that was, you were piggybacking off your previous point. Sorry, I didn't read that along with the previous topic we talked about. I don't think this should be declared a separate universe like Star Trek. You know my opinion on multiverse and Star Wars. Like, I'm okay with them doing alternate timelines. I just don't want them to ever crisscross. But I'm cool with them starting a book universe that is separate. I just don't think they should say like, oh yeah, all the canon books so far, now its own universe, doesn't have anything to do with the main universe. Like that's kind of how we treat it already, right? Like that's, to me, the way Legends was already treated. It just was not directly said, right? Because George Lucas had no qualms about retconning anything he wanted. And so they've treated it with more respect in canon, but they've also taken less risks in order to do that. Um, but I would be cool with alternate timelines, infinities stories, visions stories, stuff like that, where you can go in different directions. But I wouldn't want them to just say all books we're publishing are now in their own universe, and therefore we can take risks. Like, I think that would kind of, Star Wars will always be a film first franchise, and then TV subsequently, because of its connection to George Lucas. Animation and live action will be kind of the next thing people see Star Wars as. And so I think the books would lose a little bit of their value if you felt like, well, pretty much everything I'm reading is now not connected to the really the lifeblood of the franchise. I think Star Wars book fans like us would still enjoy some of that, but I don't know if the wider audiences would give books a chance if they knew that they were not connected whatsoever to the films and the TV shows.
And I think that latter point is really the big reason why it won't happen, right? If it's not connected in some way, then you're not gonna get the general audience fans to come in. You'd have the people who are like, "Yes, finally, it's all separated out," but they're not necessarily an audience that's gonna grow, because until something becomes real, you can grow a bunch of audience of idealists, and then once they actually see the product come out, they're not gonna necessarily all be in line forever and ever and ever after that, right? Because some people will be like, "Oh, why did you keep some of these books? Why didn't you just start fresh from this point? Why didn't you connect it to the canon? Why didn't you do like multiversal crossover and stuff like that?" And then once that unified front kind of collapses, then you're gonna have less and less of an audience, right? So I I don't want that. I mean, I know Star Trek has always kind of treated the books as separate, but Star Trek also has its own controversies. When they came out with some new sort of trilogies recently, they didn't even line up with a lot of the previous books too. And they're like, "Oh, okay, like so there isn't any continuity between this already non-canon continuity." And then they had to like explain it off and all that. And it just like I said, it just gets complicated the more because everyone kind of has a depiction, has a version that they're looking for. So yeah, I know. Like what line of canon, like Star Skywalker's Academy says, like what line of canon in the EU do we follow, right? I mean, you look at Liam's consolidated EU timeline for the Clone Wars. He gets people fighting about him all the time. The guy put in so many hours for it, but I mean, to be fair, it's there is no truth to that, right? We don't 100% know. That's the very best assumptions you can make with what content there is. But like you were saying, George Lucas retconned so much of it. So much of Republic Commando has been retconned away and all that. There are these things that never were meant to fit together, but we tried to make fit together because George was like, "Yeah, I don't really care," until he cared, and then it changed everything. And are you gonna trust what the maker himself said, or are you gonna trust a bunch of people who've been, licensed out these characters from the franchise to kind of do what new fun things they want to do, right? So, yeah, it was always a difficult choice for them. But I don't think, we should have a full separate universe at this point. Just like we were talking about before with you, just make memorable stories and storylines that can continue over eras, can connect different eras, can still connect to bigger live action and animated mediums and have those still be the greater, bigger story of that time period. But like Liam said, if you can get like an Obi-Wan book of him as a Padawan, like the Padawan book, that then maybe gets like a Clone Wars tie-in, and then we get something that's like set just before A New Hope. They can kind of touch on all the stuff that's happening in the shows and the movies, but still is more of the tissue and the connective tissue that started off in the Padawan book from Kirsten White. Great, do that. We need to see more of that so that people are rewarded for reading those things in a line. And you won't get a lot of great, incredible heavy books. To be fair, it just won't. Like we were talking about, lore wise, it's impossible. But you can still get memorable stuff out of it for sure.
Guy who loves Star Wars sent us a super chat. Thank you so much. Says
Thank you very much.
keep up the great work. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying the stream and getting to talk Star Wars with us. We appreciate you joining tonight. And then we'll wrap up tonight, I think, with one last question from Brandon, who says, "Last non-Star Wars question: which popular Superman villains, aside from Lex Luthor, would you like to see appear in Gunn's Superman 2 sequel?" I mean, the top one, I feel like for most Superman fans, we've just been waiting for forever. It's almost happened like a million times, is Brainiac. I would prefer they save Brainiac though for a Justice League movie. I think he's a great villain that you can use in a Justice League movie. Yeah, maybe you'd be copying the Avengers arc a little bit between like, the AI as the second villain of a Justice League movie before Darkseid. Um, but I think he's a big enough threat. They've made him a big enough threat in the last 20 years to be a Justice League villain. So even though Brainiac is probably the one I want to see most on screen, I'd say wait for Justice League. As for Superman villains alone, I feel like somebody like Metallo would be too small, even though he's a good villain for an entire Superman movie. Unless obviously you're going to connect every villain that's in one of these with Lex. And we've seen Zod so many times that I want to see Zod again in the DCU, but I don't want to see him immediately. So my pick would be Parasite, who is a very, very cool villain, basically can sap the power out of anybody. And he can kind of take Superman's power and, make him go a little bit more toe to toe with him on that level. So I'd love to see Parasite. I think he could be an intimidating villain as well as has, a complicated and kind of tragic backstory in himself on his own to be a cool Superman villain, somebody who has a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like he has some gravity to him as a character. You feel bad for him. You can relate to him maybe a little bit. So you could add Parasite. I think he would be a really cool villain to add there. Somebody that I think fits the James Gunn vibe very well, and he could find a way to make it work would be Toymaker. I think that would be a really fun, interesting villain for James Gunn to mess around with because I think it's a villain that like you don't think that Toyman could be like a cool Superman villain, but he is. He's one of Superman's best villains, and so I want to see how James Gunn can mess around with that and make Toyman like somebody who's actually kind of compelling in a broader blockbuster sense, especially if he's like funded by Lex. So I think that could be something that's pretty cool as well. But yeah, those would kind of be my top choices. I think I really would go Parasite more than anybody.
I'm not the most well versed with Superman villains per se, but I think we know that with what Gunn has been talking about recently, he's not going necessarily to do a Superman 2. He's kind of doing a Superman saga. Obviously, Supergirl's up next, and we know Lobo's going to be in there. So that knocks out a character that probably has the gravitas to fight Superman, right? And, with his immortality and everything, basically. I think, though, there is a lot of left behind stuff in the first one, in the Superman movie that came out this summer. Ultraman could kind of be spun off with the whole black hole sequence into a sort of Bizarro. I think that would be pretty interesting. He wouldn't be as big of a character, but one thing I would love is for that Ultraman, Superman clone would to actually become sort of a character, try to be changed by everything that he sees. Maybe he's in a parallel universe. What if Superman takes his place for a while before his body starts decomposing and he can't keep up with intellect or whatever equivalent of Lex Luthor or whoever can help him out there. I'd love to see that be there. Could he carry a full film? Not entirely. Like, I feel like you'd have to have, like, Cyborg Superman along him side him and all that, like, you'd have to have all these other Superman variants that are not true variants, but, like, failed experiments off of him. Um, so, yeah, I wouldn't say he could carry a film, but it'd be pretty nice to have him be, like, a secondary villain and then have this Lex kinda be like, "Oh my god, you're back? Like, you're disgusting, you're horrible, I'm glad that you're gone and wasted away," right? Now, I think a villain that could be pretty good, I don't know exactly how to say it, Mr. Mix It Up or something, right? Yeah,
Mix this spittle like
whatever you said there, right? I've seen him in the cartoons and all that, and I think that'll be really good because we've already kinda seen a Superman be countered power-wise, right? But one critical issue that I think a lot of us have now that time has passed, some of the dust has settled with Superman is that so much of the marketing is on like, oh, wow, we're gonna see so much of Clark Kent and that persona here and all of that. And here we don't really get it in the final product. We get it with him and Lois Lane, but nothing really with the Daily Planet, nothing with Superman's best friend, Jimmy Olsen, and all that. So I'd love to see obviously whatever next depiction of the Daily Planet crew and Clark Kent come out, that he actually gets way more to do in the film. And I think this is where a character like that with a little bit more magic, where you have to kind of go with the wit of the character, where he could kind of play off of the Clark persona and versus the Superman persona a bit more. I think that'd be quite good. I think that'd be a great way for him to kind of use the brains of the character because that's one thing I was a bit surprised by. It took a There's so much more of a martial focus to this Superman that we've seen in Man of Steel and everything already, but he's not nearly as strong in my opinion. So I want to see more of the smartness to outwit the outwitter, right? I'd love to see that kind of happen here. I I don't know if that's necessarily if you've read all the comics, maybe I'm not getting it fully 100% right, but I'd love something like that. I think it's too early for a dark side, way too early for a doomsday, but I think you can definitely do some work with like a Bizarro as a secondary villain, and then have this fantastic stuff that actually pushes the Clint and Kent persona to actually be a bit more of a character, be a more of someone kind of working through stuff. So that's how I would go for another villain.
yeah, anybody but Doomsday. Please don't do Doomsday. I I mean, I love the depth of Superman as much as anybody, but no, let's wait and save that for something that actually matters. I That's like one of my least favorite parts of Batman versus Superman, amongst many things, is forcing Doomsday into your second movie in the series. Like it's ridiculous. But Yeah, I love the idea of Bizarro. I've often tried to wonder how you can make a Bizarro movie work where he's the main antagonist. I mean, there's been the Bizarro that James Gunn is obviously kind of going for. If he's setting up Ultraman to become Bizarro, he's really going for the John Byrne version of Bizarro, which is basically the same thing. It's Clone of Superman gone wrong by Lex Luthor, which is not the traditional version of Bizarro, but it is the Bronze Age version of Bizarro post Crisis. So you get the Bizarro idea without all the like Bizarro world and all that type of stuff, which is cool, but also I think James Gunn would just be brilliant with taking on Bizarro World and all that type of stuff. So I would love to see an amalgamation of both. I would love it. Bizarro was the main villain, but I feel like that would be a little too quick if you just had Ultraman and then like you go back to Bizarro for the second Superman movie.
Yeah.
And if this really is like a Superman team up movie more so than a Superman sequel, then maybe you save that for Superman 2 and then like the true Superman 2, and then this is more like I feel like this movie is going to take Superman a little bit more galactic because of Supergirl being there. They want to go galactic with her, so I think that would be something that's kind of interesting. Um, as for Mr. Mixie, I think he would be awesome. I kind of hope they save him a little bit until they get later into the like all the interdimensional imp stuff, and they do reference the interdimensional
They
imps
do. Yeah.
in the film, but I want to see Batmite really badly one day, and so I
Oh,
hope they do both. But yeah, I think those two would be cool. Cyborg Superman would also be cool, but I think it's too early for him as well. I think they should save him for the Death of Superman story that they'll eventually do. But yeah, I think any of these options are really neat. I mean, and going with Supergirl in the next movie, you need either a villain who can stand up to both of them, which there's not too many. Another one I've always thought would be ideal, and like when I was writing my original outlines for my Superman movie back in college, I was like coming up with the DCU how I would do it. Mongol is my villain, and I think Mongol would work really well. And we've also just had kind of one of the definitive Mongol stories in the last few years, with the War World saga stuff that came out a few years ago, and so they could do something like that. Uh, so I think they could absolutely tie in Mongol with that if they decide to go galactic, but I also kind of feels maybe too early because Mongol could be you could take a lot of Superman villains and make them Justice League villains because of how powerful they are to go up against Superman. So it's like kind of a fine line, unless you want to do like full on Justice League villains like Amazo or Starro, which might be a little bit too ridiculous. But we'll see. James Gunn makes ridiculous work. But I think that's going to wrap up our stream for tonight. Um, Skywalker Academy. There's no Doomsday is not in Superman. He's in Batman versus Superman, is what I was referencing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is what I hated that he was in Batman versus Superman. So I'm sorry if I spoiled a movie that's 10 years old for you. I didn't mean to but like don't watch it. It's not any good anyways. So but yeah, in the Superman movie from James Gunn, there's no Doomsday, and I'm very thankful for that. But thank you guys for watching tonight. Hopefully you all enjoyed the stream. Hopefully you join next week as well. For the next stream, we'll be answering your guys' questions live, taking your guys' questions and running down the Star Wars news if there is any. We had a lot of great discussions tonight. So thanks so much for watching. A lot more people watching right now than have hit the like button, so we'd really appreciate if you hit the like button before you left tonight. If you're watching on replay, comment below your thoughts and let us know what you thought of the stream, and make sure you join us next week. Subscribe for more content just like this, and stay tuned for more content on the channel. We've got our shorts coming out every week as usual, our polls twice a day, every day in the community section as well. And you can also post if you want to on the community section as well. We have videos coming out, including our two-parter coming out soon here. We have up for members currently, you can get early access to our High Republic book rankings, which was uploaded today. We also have the High Republic comic rankings coming here soon. We just had the High Republic timeline out, so a lot of High Republic wrap-up stuff this last week or so. But hopefully, you guys are enjoying that content. And if you're not a High Republic person, maybe this is your chance to get into it by seeing what our thoughts are on all these different things. Thanks so much for watching the stream, everybody, and we will see you all next time.